Hey everybody, I'm glad you got that behind the scenes look. A little bit of technical error to start it off as always. We are back with another episode of the Dom and Drew show. This time we're doing, what is this, part 5? Or is this part 6? Whoa, chapter 5. Yep. That's what it is. We're doing part 6 of this show on the decree on the Apostolate of the Laity. As always, I am joined by the one and only Dom Masso of the Logos Project. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing good. You know what? I'm going to be honest. We had almost zero technical issues until I accidentally moved something on the live stream as it was on the
you
screen.
Jinxed it. Yeah.
but that's better than like some of the other issues we've had. So, anyways,
definitely.
Yeah, we're tearing right through this document. If you've been keeping up with us, we have gone all the way through chapters 1 through 4, completing chapter 4 last time. And I believe there's only 2 chapters left in the document. So we're getting close. And then we'll be done with this document. And I think we're going to move right on to the next one. So,
sounds good to me.
Document. Yeah. Which we haven't really formally decided. So if anyone, I said this last time and no one commented, but if you have a suggestion for which Vatican II document should be next, make sure to put that in the comments. And we'll get right into it, I guess. Let's go ahead and
I'm ready. Whenever you're ready, Drew. Yep.
Sweet. So just so everyone's aware, once again, the link to this is in the description of this video. So if you want to pull this up on your own for reference, read along with us. We'll have it up on the screen, of course, but just so you know right where we're getting this from, I think it's important that it's in there. So you can click on that link. You can also get to the playlist for the rest of this series so far. We're going back and forth between the 2 of our channels. So if you click on that playlist, you can watch through them in sequential order. That way, if you haven't seen one of these episodes yet, you can go catch up before we get started on this one. So with that, let's do this. This is chapter 5, External Relationships.
Awesome.
I always get super thirsty when we're doing this show because it's so much like reading and talking and then so I have to have a good drink of water before we get started. But
I got my cup of water here.
Paragraph 23. Whether the lay apostolate exercised by the faithful as individuals or as members of organizations, it should be incorporated into the apostolate of the whole church according to a right system of relationships. Indeed, union with those with whom the Holy Spirit has assigned rule of his church, Acts 20:28, is an essential element of the Christian apostolate. No less necessary is cooperation among various projects of the apostolate, which must be suitably directed by the hierarchy. Indeed, the spirit of unity should be promoted in order that fraternal charity may be resplendent in the whole apostolate of the church. Common goals may be attained and destructive rivalries avoided. For this, there is need for mutual esteem among all forms of the apostolate in the church, with due respect for the particular character of each organization, proper coordination. This is most fitting since a particular activity in the church requires harmony and apostolic cooperation on the part of both branches of the clergy, the religious, and the laity. Any thoughts on that first little section?
Not really, other than it's just saying basically that if you're going to do work for the church, make sure it's actually for the church, as in you're in the church, that your work is sanctioned by the church. The church is not a democracy, it's a hierarchy. Mm-hmm. But, it's not like any other hierarchy either. I mean, the people in the hierarchy don't do what they want. They themselves are subservient to God's divine revelation. Mm-hmm. But in that harmony, right, is only possible if there is that apostolic anchor, as Pope Benedict would call it, that Petrine structure, as Balthazar might call it.
Right.
So that's what I see here.
Right. Yeah. And it's, you'd think it would go without saying. I wonder in the current atmosphere of just social media world, this is, this especially, fraternal charity and destructive rivalries being avoided. I think that's becoming more important, right? Like a lot of content creators who have been, in the Catholic speaking circuit for a while. I know Matt Fradd talks about this. Like when JP2 was Pope, everyone felt like they're on the same team. It was like they're unstoppable. For various reasons, not so much anymore. And I feel like, yeah, maybe this call for fraternal charity and destructive rivalries being avoided is worth reflecting on again. Because I know, like, just from my own perspective in making content, it can be really simple to like, really easy to see someone doing something that's effective and go, oh man, they're doing something that I should have done, or they beat me to it, or so and so's response video came out before mine or whatever. And you can, or like I disagree with this person and I kind of wish they'd stop putting out content or whatever. It can get really tricky to navigate
That's
and not get
you
caught
know
up in that.
that's a really good point. I wasn't thinking of that, but it's obvious, right? And it got me thinking because what the church hierarchy does is it makes possible a unity that works right
Mm-hmm.
through time, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to have fighting, and
Mm-hmm.
that we're not going to have, say, bishops that are not doing their job properly.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, and about being online, especially right now, I think we all know we're all at each other's throats, right? There's not a
Right.
lot of getting along right now, and
Right.
I think that I've contributed to that. I'm trying to do so less. I don't know if people have noticed my channel was trying to calm down and focus on Pope Benedict's theology.
Yep.
But last thing I want to put, because that's such a good point you make, and I don't know, it was right there in front of us, right? And
Mm-hmm.
last night I was talking to some friends. It was men's night here at my parish, and we were talking about a lot of the strife and arguing, and I came to realize that um, I think we all want to convince someone who disagrees with us that our
Mm-hmm.
position is the correct one, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
makes sense. I think there's two extremes. One is like it's my way or the highway, and the other is this kind of radical relativism,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think Pope Benedict exemplified the possibility of opening up a sphere in which it's not my way or the highway, and
Hmm.
it's not relativism. And so there was a few people, in the last few weeks that I remember talking to where I disagreed with them, but you know what? I said, you know what? That's okay. Like, it
Right.
isn't something essential. It's something that I very much so disagree. But you know what? I said, as long as you follow the essential, you know what? Don't change what you're doing necessarily, because it's not one of those things that you have to, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just it's my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. So anyway, I guess I'm just saying, to learn to live with people we don't see eye to eye on might
Right.
actually be more fruitful than we think. But yeah.
Yeah, I've been reflecting on this a lot. I mean, it's no secret to anyone who's watched my channel in the past couple months. I have sort of overemphasized reacting to some news stuff, which is not my normal bend. And boy, howdy, I'm learning that that's not going to be the thing that I do, because there were some stances that I took really firmly, and still come to those positions. Like I still hold the positions I hold on like recent documents and things like that. But I really had to take a step back past couple weeks and realize, hey, even though I'm reading this as like a very clear document, I'm talking about fiducia supplicans for people who are reading between the lines. No need to read between the lines. I'll be honest. There's a lot of people who don't think it's so clear, and while I don't agree with the reasons they don't think it's clear, I still have to acknowledge that they don't think it's clear and be charitable, right? It's one of those moments where, regardless of what we all individually think of something that's happening, if there's a diversity of responses among people who are intending to be good and faithful and submissive Catholics and in unity with the hierarchy, then that's another moment to take pause and take a stance of charity, which I've been trying to do. Because instead of being like, no, 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 guys, it's not a big deal, we should all just get over it. It's like, well, it's obviously there's a variety of responses. I should be just as humble about whether or not my response is right, as opposed to assuming like, oh, well, this is the correct response, everyone needs to get in line with me, and assuming a sort of like arrogance about it. Because the reality is people receive things differently. They come to different, yeah, like you said, on especially secondary issues within allegiance to Rome. There's secondary issues that you can have a divergence of opinion on, and instead of trying to create everyone into the uniform singular theology, how do I say this without sounding like a liberal nitty? There is legitimate diversity that's good, I guess, within theology and practice and belief. And I'm trying to say that in a way that's not saying we can all just be different and still be in
Yeah.
communion. There are clear essentials, there are clear lines, there's clear truth on a lot of things. And then there's things where, especially for like you and I in our apostolates, where we're not at all sponsored by the hierarchy to speak on behalf of them, charity should abound, right? That's kind of what I've been thinking about, at least. So
Yeah, again, it doesn't mean that we trivialize differences,
Mm-hmm.
but we have to figure out a way to live amidst differences in a way
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't disturb our own peace, but also that can create a space where we find a way to have a genuine communion with as many people as possible.
Right.
um, and so, but that does require an adherence to the objectivity of truth, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of, relativism would be where we say that there's your truth and my truth and whatever, and the
Mm-hmm.
moment you disagree with that, though, relativism comes cracking down on you like a
Mm-hmm.
dictatorship, as again Pope Benedict said.
Right.
But anyway, but this is kind of a tangent. But the point being
Yeah.
is, like, how do you find that right balance? I do think ultimately it comes down to genuine authority.
Mm.
Genuine authority is something that inspires obedience. And it makes obedience much more easy because you recognize that there's something here that is good, that
Mm-hmm.
wants my good, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there can be a kind of authority that's reduced to mere power that doesn't inspire obedience. Doesn't mean we shouldn't obey either. It just makes things more difficult.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's keep trucking along here. The hierarchy should promote the apostolate of the laity, provide it with spiritual principles and support, direct the conduct of this apostolate to the common good of the church, and attend to the preservation of doctrine and order. Indeed, the lay apostolate admits of different types of relationships with the hierarchy in accordance with the various forms and objects of this apostolate. For in the church there are many apostolic undertakings which are established by the free choice of the laity and regulated by their prudent judgment. The mission of the church can be better accomplished in certain circumstances by undertakings of this kind, and therefore they are frequently praised or recommended by the hierarchy. No project, however, may claim the name of Catholic unless it has obtained the consent of lawful church authority.
All right, let
Certain
me
for-
stop you right
Yep,
there.
yep.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
go
I
ahead.
just wanted to ask you, Drew. I know you've been asked before, and I know the answer, but for the audience, don't you have Catholic in your title?
I do. Yeah, and I did that before. I knew I had to ask my bishop. But then I asked my bishop. I was a convert, man. I just started a channel.
Yeah.
Canon law was no thing to me yet. But no, I'm kidding. I did write a letter to my bishop. Or, well, we didn't write a letter. It was more like an email. And my priest is pretty close with our bishop, and he talked to him about it on the phone. And then one of the bishops, I don't know if the bishop and his secretary listened to it or just his secretary, but either way,
Mhm.
he said he liked it and seemed to be within the mission of the diocese. And so we got formal approval in the form of like verbal confirmation and verbal approval from him to my priest that I could keep the name Catholic and continue doing exactly what I'm doing. So I'm good to go, which that was a
Excellent.
sketchy moment because I was like, oh no, what if he says no? And then
Yeah.
I have to change my name.
But I
But
think that is
that's
an
okay.
excellent illustration of what we just read, right?
Mhm.
What you just did. So when we're talking about the laity, we're talking about an apostolate, right? And so what you did is exactly what this document is talking about, which is to
Mhm.
make sure we're in step with Holy Mother Church. And when we get the green light, then go forth with great zeal, right?
Right. Right, yeah,
So,
and then now to bring the whole story to a close. Now there are times when I think about changing my name again, anyways, just because there's cooler names. But I'm like, I got his approval. I can't just change it now.
yeah, yeah.
No, it's been good though. That's helped the podcast grow. Like as a result of that, I was able to have our
Mhm.
diocesan vocations director on, and then they actually email blasted that episode out to our whole diocese, which is a nice little spike of engagement there. So it's like, hey, when you see your bishop's newsletter has your podcast in it, I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then I was instantly self-conscious about all the meme reviews we've done on this channel because I was like, I hope he hasn't seen those. Oh, man. Maybe he's watching those for fun, though. Who knows? Maybe he likes them, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
He probably has never seen them, which is good. That's for the best, which says something about that type of content, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, yeah. No, I agree with you, though. It is good. Like, you want to be in lockstep with the hierarchy. And, like if you are starting a podcast, you just can get around that by not using the name Catholic, and then they can't really stop you.
Mhm.
But at the same time, for me, it is kind of nice to know this is going to sound really weird for anyone that's like an American conservative, which tends to be anti-authoritarian. It's nice to know that your authority is at least kind of looking at you. There's like some accountability with knowing that my
Mhm.
priest watches my show. A couple other priests watch my show. And I've told them, hey, if I ever say anything crazy, please tell me. I actually gave
Yeah, I
my
agree.
priest permission to like rebuke me publicly if he needs to. So it's good to set those boundaries for yourself if you're doing work like this, I think.
Yeah.
So,
No, I think that's a
anyways,
beautiful illustration of the document. Yeah.
yeah, cool. Well, here we can keep plugging along. Certain forms of the apostolate of the laity are given explicit recognition by the hierarchy through, though in various ways. Because of the demands of the common good of the church, moreover, ecclesiastical authority can select and promote in a particular way some of the apostolic associations and projects which have an immediately spiritual purpose, thereby assuming in them a special responsibility. Thus, making various dispositions of the apostolate according to circumstances, the hierarchy joins some particular form of it more closely with its own apostolic function. Yet the proper nature and distinctiveness of each apostolate must be preserved, and the laity must not be deprived of the possibility of acting on their own accord. In various church documents, this procedure of the hierarchy is called a mandate. Finally, the hierarchy entrusts to laity certain functions which are more closely connected with pastoral duties, such as the teaching of Christian doctrine, certain liturgical actions, and the care of souls. By virtue of this mission, the laity are fully subject to higher ecclesiastical control in the performance of this work. That is us podcasters, right? We're doing some teaching, I would
Yeah.
say, in a way. Well, some people are just having chats, but like if you're like
Right.
what you and I are doing, probably falls under that umbrella.
Yeah, but notice how, teaching doctrine and then the care of souls and the liturgy. I mean, these are
Mm-hmm.
things that are the church's not just responsibility, but
Mm-hmm.
the church's particular responsibility. So
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense that those very things are, reserved to the church. And so if we participate in it, we participate with the church's, solicitous
Mm-hmm.
care, and we have to make sure we're in step with her.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. I'll keep plugging along. Maybe we'll finish out 24 and see if you have any thoughts. As
Okay.
regards, um, I'm guessing that's as regard to works and institutions in the temporal order. The role of the ecclesiastical hierarchy is to teach and authentically interpret the moral principles to be followed in temporal affairs. Furthermore, they have the right to judge, after careful consideration of all related matters with consultation with experts, whether or not such works and institutions conform to moral principles, and the right to decide what is required for the protection and promotion of values in the supernatural order. Any thoughts about
Yeah.
that whole section?
I mean, basically, especially when you're ministering, when it comes to things that are particularly belong to the church, that the church has authority here, and you do not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean the church is always going to say the perfect thing, and the church, I hate to say it, makes mistakes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we have different gradations. We distinguish between definitive teachings, pastoral applications. There's various things that we can consider, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the authentic interpretation of divine revelation, YouTube doesn't have the authority to do that.
Regardless of what
Okay.
some have said. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, man.
And so if we're lay people and we're going to do that, then we
Mm-hmm.
have to do it with that in mind. Now, Donum Veritatis is a document that addresses the relationship between theologians, or teachers of the faith that are lay people, or even priests, right? And the magisterium. And,
Mm-hmm.
there's more conversation to be had around that. But I don't want to get too much into it. I just want to say that we have to remember we don't have the authority. And that if there is something that is not done the best, that we are not happy with, well, as the document Donum Veritatis says, truth will prevail, and so patience and
Mm-hmm.
bearing our cross is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So people don't need to freak out and be consuming YouTube so much. I know it's impossible to get away from media now any longer,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just saying we just got to remember how things work. That's just the way it
Mm-hmm.
is. Pray more. That's what I'm trying to do right now.
Right. Yeah. No, I
And
mean, it's a timely message in that regard. Like, I think many people are kind of encountering the reality in which media and social media and influencers or YouTube creators, whatever you want to call whatever your sphere is, they can really impact not just how you feel about a particular situation in the air or in the church at large or whatever, but they can actually impact your own life, your own effectiveness, and all that. And so there's some due caution, which is ironic because I'm running a YouTube channel and I'm trying to grow it. But so it's not to like to say that
Yeah,
this is not a thing that should happen, but like there's a lot of we should both approach creators with caution, and as creators we should approach creating things with caution so that we
I
don't
agree.
cause undue scandal. Yeah, which is tough,
Just
man, because you get clicks when you get really rowdy. So
No, I agree. And just to add to that, like it is a responsibility, which means it's somewhat difficult, right? I found myself when I'm online typing posts or making videos, I find myself having to be careful on what I
hmm
say, not just because I don't have a certain authority, or I want to make sure I don't contradict the church, but also
right.
because I also want to create an environment of charity and peace and communion. And so I also try to take into account people who are upset with the church, right? Or who are
hmm
upset and vocal about their being upset with the church, you know,
right.
because it won't help to just kind of lay the hammer down, slam the hammer down either. I mean, sometimes you have to.
hmm
Again, it comes down to authority. Do I have the authority to do that? It's difficult because I'm realizing that I'm having to be careful with what I write and what I say
hmm
all the time. I can't speak freely like around a bonfire with the guys the other night. I can't do that.
right. Right. Yep. That's difficult. Yeah. It's a tough thing to navigate. Like I kind of realized that with all this recent stuff, and not to just keep reflecting on it, but I lost a lot of subscribers. I gained more than I lost ultimately,
Yeah,
but I definitely
yeah,
was like, huh. And I think what it was is there were things I was saying that were being perceived by people who were confused or angry or hurt or upset as dismissive of them. And I even tried to preface it of like, I'm not trying to be dismissive of it. I'm just trying to like, cut through the noise or whatever. And in a sense, you're like never going to please anybody or everybody. You're going to please some people, right? But at the same time, yeah, it's very hard to keep in mind that like right now, you and I are just sitting in the room alone with pixels interpreting the other person on the other side. As far as my
yeah,
like actual like primal brain is concerned, it just thinks that you and I are talking in a weird way. But it's
yeah,
hard to be cognizant of the fact that, I mean, this show's not huge. We have 2 people watching right now. We'll get a couple hundred who see it after it's published. But that's like, if you
yeah.
really quantify a couple hundred people watching what you say, that's terrifying. Because this doesn't
No,
feel any more nerve wracking than if I was just talking to someone in my living room. But in reality, it's like like we're up on stage at a panel at a conference, even with only a couple hundred people viewing this, right? That's a weird
yeah,
thing to think about. Anyways, all right,
definitely.
let's keep chugging along here. So paragraph 25. Bishops, pastors of parishes, and other priests of both branches of the clergy should keep in mind that the right and duty to exercise this apostolate is common to all the faithful, both clergy and laity, and that the laity also have their own roles in building up the church. For this reason, they should work fraternally with the laity in and for the church, and take special care of the laypersons in these apostolic works. Special care should be taken to select priests who are capable of promoting particular forms of the apostolate of the laity and are properly trained. Those who are engaged in this ministry represent the hierarchy in their pastoral activity by virtue of the mission they receive from the hierarchy. Always adhering faithfully to the spirit and teaching of the church, they should promote proper relations between laity and hierarchy. They should devote themselves to nourishing the spiritual life and an apostolic attitude in the Catholic societies entrusted to them. They should contribute their wise counsel to the apostolic activity of these associations and promote their undertakings. Through continuous dialogue with the laity, these priests should carefully investigate which forms make apostolic activity more fruitful. They should promote the spirit of unity within the association as well as between it and others. Finally, in keeping with the spirit and norms of their societies, religious brothers and sisters should value the apostolic works of the laity and willingly devote themselves to promoting lay enterprises. They should also strive to support, uphold, and fulfill priestly functions. Anything in there?
Yeah, well, I think here you see the kind of prophetic, you know, foreseeing of the council when it comes to the role and importance of the laity going forward. I mean, you and I know, and many people know, people watching this, that priestly vocations have plummeted.
Mm-hmm.
You have one priest for 3 parishes sometimes saying like 10 different
Right.
masses on Sunday.
Yeah,
That
it's
might
crazy.
be an extreme case, but I mean, there's a lot of these cases, parishes that have to be shut down and kind of brought with other parishes. Religious orders do same thing. So the Catholic Church is hemorrhaging. We all know this. Bishop Barron talks about it with his ministry, the nuns, etc. So, you know, what this means, especially, is that priestly vocations become more and more few. I mean, the whole
Mm-hmm.
conversation surrounding whether we can now maybe introduce a non-celibate priesthood revolves around this reality of, well, we are not having a lot of vocations. So here,
Mm-hmm.
the council, I think, actually gives us tools going forward on how the lay people can pick up some of the work. And but at the end of that section, it talks about the priestly ministry of ordained ministers. Right, we are not priests.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think you and I both know this because we're active in our parish. We're active online. We're doing a lot of things. We're getting the approval, or at least not condemnation of our pastors. You know, in fact, my priest is glad for what I do. He watches some of it. I think I sent him a video or two, and he listened to it. And
Nice.
I'm on good terms with him. And so yeah, I mean, that's what I read there is cooperating, right, and
Mm-hmm.
moving forward in this new paucity of vocations. So
Yeah, and it is cool to see. I've shared a lot in this series so far that in my particular parish we're trying to actualize Vatican II on the ground in a lot of ways, and just renew the culture of our parish to where it's naturally creating disciples, where it's naturally creating faithful Catholics who are well catechized, who are on mission. And we're trying to do it culturally in the culture of the parish, not programmatically through like camps and like talks and things like that. But that's one of the things that I've noticed is like when this is talking about the cooperation between our hierarch, our priest, and us. We work really closely with our priest. It's awesome. We get to hang out. We get to pray for what the parish is doing. There's people that are like starting to kind of, I guess, step into their personal apostolate, and there's some um, what I really like about how my priest is doing it is it's very organic. Like he's not saying, okay, here's like the rigid way that you do this, and it's like super programmatic and has to follow these exact forms. He's very much of the belief that doing this organically and having people's natural, sort of, I guess you could say, charism and vocation surface just from encounters with Christ is better, right? Because then they have this thing
yeah,
they're passionate about, that they're good at, that benefits people, and then it's a win, right? So we're starting to see like the very beginnings of some of that stuff. So when I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, this is cool. Like there's been multiple times that we're reading this document in full, and I'm like, hey, we're kind of starting to do that. That's good.
yeah, no,
So
our
it's good to
priest is
see.
the same way. Yeah, he's because we have our we call it the young adult group, right? We do Bible studies on Wednesday. We got men and women nights on one weekend, and then game nights, what we call
Nice.
it, on the other weekend. And we do a lot of things, and Father has told us that he loves our group. He's glad he shows up sometimes and gives a talk, and then
Nice.
leaves kind of randomly, sporadically, but we all are glad to see him. So that's this kind of fruitful,
Mm-hmm.
harmonious relationship between the shepherd and the flock, and then the sheep stepping up to do things, and the
Mm-hmm.
priest encouraging them, not feeling threatened, and vice versa. And I
Mm-hmm.
always tell Father, I'm like, Father, you the boss. Here's an idea. You don't like it, just let me know.
Right.
And
Yep.
he always likes the idea. So
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. All right, we're getting to 26, 27. Let's see here. In dioceses, so insofar as possible, there should be councils which assist the apostolic work of the church either in the field of evangelization and sanctification or in the charitable, social, or other spheres. And here it is fitting that the clergy and religious should cooperate with the laity. While preserving the proper character and autonomy of each organization, these councils will be able to promote the mutual coordination of various lay associations and enterprises. Councils of this type should be established as far as possible also on the parochial, interparochial, and interdiocesan level, as well as the national or international sphere. A special secretariat, moreover, should be established at the Holy See for the service and promotion of the lay apostolate. It can serve as a well-equipped center for communicating information about the various apostolic programs of the laity, promoting research into modern problems arising in this field, and assisting the hierarchy and laity in their apostolic works with its advice. The various movements and projects of the apostolate of the laity throughout the world should also be represented in this secretariat, and here the clergy and religious are to cooperate with the laity. Seems like we're getting to some housekeeping stuff here. Like, here's a little bit of how practically they want this to work,
There is something that stuck out if you go up to the first line. In dioceses, insofar as possible, there should be councils which assist the apostolic work of the church, either in the field of evangelization and sanctification or in the charitable, social, and other spheres. I'll just stop right there. So this is, it's been exasperated by the media, but this is, I think, the question of synodality, right? I still haven't, I've been so busy. I'm doing all these different things, and I haven't yet written down the list of questions I want to ask Dr. Declue when I make that video with him, if it happens, because he addresses a lot of this in his series Behind the Word on Fire paywall, which I recommend anyone watching. If you're a Word on Fire Institute member, please watch those 3 seminars by Dr. Declue. It's really good.
Just stream it on my Discord. They won't sue me. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But so there's also Bishop Varden is a bishop from Norway who's a Trappist monk, right? He was invited by the monks of Salem to give a retreat, and the monks of Salem asked Bishop Varden. They gave him a topic, and the topic was synodality and holiness. And so Bishop Varden, if you want to look it up, his website is Coram Fratribus, which just means amongst brothers. And he's an excellent bishop. Look out for him. He's a really good pastor. And he writes about synodality in the Old Testament, right? In the New Testament, in the history of the church. And he links it to this category of holiness, right? Of sanctification.
This website here, Dom?
That's it. Coram Fratribus Interexi. Yeah.
All right, I'll put it.
It's good stuff. And so he gave this retreat for the monks of Salem, which is Salem is historically, anyone who knows anything about the liturgical movement, Gregorian chants, and all that stuff. It's an important place. Anyway, and the point really is, what does synodality mean? And again, I'll get into this further with Dr. Declue, hopefully. But synodality is a walking together. It's not individualistic, but it's communal. A walking together towards something. In our case, towards someone, right? And so here we can think of the pillar of fire in the Old Testament with the Israelites leaving Egypt, right? And that's why holiness is the point of synodality. Think of the road to Emmaus, right? And then the realization that it's Jesus we've been walking with, and he's the destination as well. Mm-hmm. So anytime there's talk about changing church teaching or reconsidering changing things about church teaching, that's not in step, pun intended, with synodality, which is a journeying towards the Lord. Now, synodality, because it is this journeying towards the Lord that involves us sinners, it can go wrong. We can take wrong turns. We got to retrace our steps and start heading towards the Lord again. But any communal walking together implies that kind of authoritative principle of the destination. And the hierarchical structure of the church is what makes that not just, in the future, but present as well. So anytime there's a synod, you need a protos, right? This is these terms. We need to rescue these terms from our own tradition and not let more progressive people co-opt these terms. I'm on a tangent here. I can tell. I apologize. But the point being is synodos, right, requires a protos. But these are terms we have. These are terms we need to recover. These are terms that we see here. The council, in the way the church is meant to walk together towards that destination. You need the vertical and the horizontal. I promise I'm done. That's all I had to say.
No, that's good. I have nothing to add without getting us in trouble. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm learning to keep my mouth shut. So I have jokes about Catholic culture that I'm like, it's probably not helpful. But okay. Yeah. let's carry on, and then we'll have a decision to make at the end of this next paragraph, I guess, about, we're only 35 minutes in. But
Oh, dang.
paragraph 27, the quasi-common heritage of the gospel and the common duty of Christian witness resulting from it recommend and frequently require the cooperation of Catholics with other Christians on the part of individuals and communities within the church, either in activities or in associations in the national or international field. Likewise, common human values not infrequently call for cooperation between Christians pursuing apostolic aims and those who do not profess Christ's name but acknowledge these values. By this dynamic and prudent cooperation, which is of especial importance in temporal activities, the laity bear witness to Christ, the Savior of the world, as well as to the unity of the human family.
It's a beautiful passage.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate, for any of us that are more trad leaning, quasi common with other Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were like, there's probably some debate over this word right here. They didn't just say full stop common, no, quasi common. Like you guys are close, but there's some distinctions, right? I think this is very well navigated. I'm impressed with the wording of this passage. I'm sure it's even better in the Latin, but
I could look it up.
But I think what I react to with stuff like this, and it's just so true, is that it's while it is important to have debates and discussion over differences with other Christians especially, or people who, like, let's be honest, anyone that is pursuing or who is acknowledging the values of your apostolic aims but not professing Christ, they're inculcated in a Christian society without even realizing it. So, but to be able to journey with those people, to kind of borrow the language of the past reflection, but to journey with those people in a united effort is to make real those things Christ calls us to around them. And it can only increase their charity towards the Catholic Church. There's a lot of people, just anecdotally, that I've talked to who at least have a newfound respect for Catholicism after working alongside really faithful Catholics, be it like pro-life, or be it, other social issues. And even like in my own experience, there's a lot of Protestants I know personally who have softened their view on Catholicism and just hearing me pray or hearing me talk, because they go, oh, you're not this crazy, like, hidden pagan that I thought Catholics were. Like, you actually believe in the gospel, maybe a little more seriously than I do sometimes, And that sort of, let's see where we can cooperate, is really effective at evangelism ultimately. There's even one guy I talked to recently who became Catholic, past couple of years after a lifelong, sort of stint as an evangelical. And he said that, he's an older guy. He's saying that, like, back in the 70s and 80s, Roe v. Wade and all that was happening, and the Protestants weren't doing anything, and the only people he could find ground with in that particular battle was Catholics. So I think this passage is really important for that reason, and it shouldn't just be this, like a lot of times we want to shirk at this stuff and go, oh, like, no, just tell them to be Catholic, like, put the truth out there, whatever. But this can be really fruitful, and I think the important thing is what it says is, in doing this, we can bear witness to Christ. Like, if we're doing these, we're cooperating with other Christians or with non-Christians in social areas, but doing so as a missionary, like on mission, ultimately for Christ, then it will have, evangelistic fruit, not just like social justice fruit, right?
No, absolutely. And I mean, this is the heritage of the Thomist tradition. I mean, this goes back to the great commentaries on St. Thomas. I mean, this idea that we are champions of humanism, right? True humanism. There is a little bit of a debate as to how that works theologically, but that's really beside the point we're making here, which is that there is such a thing as natural law. And that a Catholic who lives in the world ought to argue for principles grounded on reason that can be shared by all people, regardless of whether they're Catholic or not.
Right.
I mean, this is replete throughout the Thomist tradition and other traditions, of course, but this whole tradition of natural law and how to promote Christian values
Mm-hmm.
that are not just Christian in a certain sense, but human values.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue if they're fully human values, they're Christian values, but that's where the
Right.
debate is. But the point ultimately is that um, I think it comes down to the fact that Catholicism is the true humanism. And when people realize that Catholics love humanity and have
Mm-hmm.
humanity in mind, its good, its dignity, and its end, which is beatitude, then people will see that as a witness to a truth that does make the world a better place. Now, not through
Mm-hmm.
some program, as you said, but
Mm-hmm.
almost like a conscience reminding someone about their actions. So, like the church here is the conscience, in a certain sense, of the state,
Mm-hmm.
and the state listens to the church. Then we can bring that kind of charity and that presence of God in the everyday life of each human being. So, yeah.
Right. No, I think that's perfect. And and in a way, like, how am I trying to frame what I'm going to say? There's a lot of discussions about like, oh, it'd be better if we had like more of a medieval situation where society is ordered around religion, and then that sets the mandate for morality, which sets the limits for the state. Ultimately, yeah, sure, that'd probably be better. That's just not our situation, though, right? We're in secular societies that have already left, and so this is a way that we can almost like reverse engineer that situation, right? If we can get them to partner with us in mutually agreeable values that are ultimately unapologetically Catholic, which there's many such cases, right? This is what I love about like the more you delve into Catholic social teaching, the more you realize like, hey, if you took these moral principles and formulated them into policy, most people would be like, oh, that's fair, reasonable, and agreeable. But as soon as you tell them it's Catholic, they go, no.
Yeah.
There's obviously a couple areas where they would all like most secular people would disagree, and that's going to be along the lines of like abortion and contraception, and then maybe
Hmm.
sexual ethics. But yeah, just any sexual ethic is probably the most disagreeable Catholic social position. But everything else, like I've been shocked about how many times, probably couldn't even count it on two hands, that like somehow politics comes up and someone's trying to be reasonable but has their bend left or right, and I'll give
Hmm.
them like the cath pill position. Oh well, here's what I think about it, and I won't tell them that it's like papal encyclicals straight up, and they'll be like, oh, you mean a just wage is one whereby a single earner could provide for a whole family? That does make sense. We should somehow, but we have a duty to make that happen in such a way so as not to be like unduly restrictive of people's enterprises. Huh? Yeah, that all makes good sense. Oh,
Yeah.
subsidiarity should be the rule. Yeah, that of course. And then like if I told them, well, yeah, that was from papal encyclical, then they'd be like, no. So I think there's a lot of ways that like if people are as gentle as a dove and as wise as a serpent, you can almost like reverse engineer a Catholic society just by being agreeable, right? But still like
No,
not compromising on the truth.
no, that's wonderful. In a certain sense, Drew, this is a can of worms that you've opened.
Oh no.
Uh, the proper relation between church and state, whether
Mm-hmm.
they ought to be separate, whether they ought to be integral. This is where we get integralism. Um, Liberalism, integralism, or is there another way? What about confessional states? I mean, this is
Mm-hmm.
kind of behind the document of the same council called Dignitatis Humanae, which is vehemently debated over
Mm-hmm.
uh, at the council and after the
Mm-hmm.
council. It was a hugely contentious document. It's what led to the to what happened in the 80s with the Society of St. Pius X, and other topics. And it's still, even for people that are not part of the society, a point of contention. Um, so, in other words, we can't settle this here in this video,
Yeah, as I
right? But
say, I didn't intend to open that big of a can of worms.
well, it's good because here we are reading Vatican II, and people are listening, and they want to know what the council said, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't know what to think, and so maybe just to give a few one liners that might be
Mm-hmm.
helpful before we move forward. Um, the question is, when we talk about religious freedom, does it mean that people have a right to believe what they want? In other words,
Mm-hmm.
does error have rights? And the simple answer is no. But does it also mean that therefore the state should be Catholic and that the church
Mm-hmm.
and the state should coerce a person to believe the truth, right? And so, and
Mm-hmm.
some answers have been yes. I think the answer is no. And why? Well, because when you talk about,
Mm-hmm.
you look at the history of the church, we have this doctrine of the two swords, right? The temporal sword, which has to do with the right ordering of temporal affairs, and then the spiritual sword, which has to do with the right ordering of orthodoxy, you might say,
Mm-hmm.
of the truth, right? And and this spiritual sword is from which the temporal sword derives its authority. So you brought up at one
Mm-hmm.
point Unam Sanctam by Boniface the Eighth, uh,
Yep.
and so I think what we need to think of, there was, I don't remember the name of this pope. I was just reading about it the other day, but if you look at these two swords, we want to avoid this idea that they're talking of power univocally, but they're talking of power analogically. So what I mean by that, and
Mm-hmm.
I won't get us bogged down, is that think of it this way. I'm trying to think of a good example. Okay, God is good, right? And
Mm-hmm.
also my friend Bill is also good, right? Now, God is not good in the same way as Bill. Or, okay, I'll put you this way. I think apple pie tastes good, right? And God also is good. In fact, the psalmist says that he
Mm-hmm.
tastes good as well, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
clearly, we're not saying that God is good in the way apple pie is good. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
there's something similar about apple pie that can be applied to God, but
Hmm.
the dissimilarity is greater, as one of the councils put it. So, my
Mm-hmm.
point being is that the power of the temporal sword is analogous to the power of the spiritual sword, but it's not the same. It's analogous, and the reason why is because we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the authority of the truth. And we know, any philosopher knows, that the truth itself, for it to actually be received, must be received with freedom, or
Mm-hmm.
else it's not the truth that's received, but something distorted by the fact that it was coerced. So how can you actually give the truth its full power
Mm-hmm.
if it's understood in terms of authority? And that's the relationship between the church and state. If you disintegrate them, right, then
Mm-hmm.
you have this idea of the states determining what is true. For example, what is man? Well, we
Right.
all know that our liberal secular state is telling us that a man is a radical individual who's sexless and who makes
Mm-hmm.
his own choices and determines the meaning of his life and is only coerced by that same kind of freedom of his neighbor.
Yeah, it's
So I do what
bad.
I want unless it infringes upon the freedom of the other guy who does what he wants.
But
Right?
if the other
This
guy's
new
view is against your liberal, tolerant view, then feel free to infringe upon it.
it
So,
becomes its own dictatorship, right? So
yep.
in other words, Drew, we live in a confessional state. It's just that its confession is not Catholicism,
Right.
right? Its
Right.
confession is paganism, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so the proper relationship is that the church doesn't have temporal power, she has authority. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where an immunity based on the dignity of the person emerges, where
Mm-hmm.
he cannot be coerced with a temporal power to
Right.
believe such and such. And that's what Dignitatis Humanae is talking about. We'll leave
Mm-hmm.
it at that. But does that make sense what I'm
No,
saying?
I think it totally does. I think it totally does. And this was never something I was scandalized by. Like I remember reading
Mhm.
Dignitatis Humanae. You say the Latin? I'm not even good at it. But I remember reading
You're
that
good.
as a Protestant coming into the church and being like, well, yeah, because that's just, frankly, that's just like, yeah, human dignity. That's also respecting human freedom. And then I always think of the Canticle of Zechariah when I think of the religious freedom issue, and I have it pulled
Mhm.
up here because I think this is an interesting point. This is Zechariah when filled with the Holy Spirit, prophesying over John the Baptist, and talking about God fulfilling His covenant promises to David and Abraham. And he says, even as He promised through the mouth of His holy prophets of old, salvation from our enemies in the hands of those who hate us, to show mercy to our
Mhm.
fathers, to be mindful of His holy covenant and the oath He swore to Abraham our father, and grant to us that, rescued from the hand of enemies, without fear we might worship Him in holiness and righteousness before Him all our days. So I've always thought of it, at least in
Mhm.
that document, in the context of this is so that the people of God, respecting the dignity of their humanity and their call and the covenant to Abraham, have the freedom
Mhm.
to worship God rightly. Um,
Mhm.
but in a way,
Yes.
it's also kind of like the Edict of Milan, right? Like It wasn't that Christianity was made the state religion at that moment. It's that like he just said, let's just put that to rest and let people choose freely out of respect of their dignity. And then, Christianity sort of emerges triumphant. And then it makes
Yeah,
it
I mean,
a diplomatic conversation as opposed to a sword that you're being hit with if you don't convert. So that's nice.
right. Yeah, but then people will bring up, well, there have been times in the history of the church where
Mm-hmm.
the temporal sword was wielded for spiritual matters,
Mm-hmm.
and that is a question a topic worth covering. But I do want to point out that a lot of the redactors of Dignitatis Humanae, um, especially those who were responsible for the very crucial little sections that are debated, were people from communist countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who
Yeah,
were
it's a good
being
historical
persecuted.
context.
They were being persecuted for their faith, and they were saying the state does not have the right, does not have the
Mm-hmm.
right to prevent us from worshiping God. And finally, Joseph Ratzinger himself says that with freedom comes responsibility, because
Mm-hmm.
we're taught the church is not using freedom in the same way liberalism is. The
Mm-hmm.
freedom the church has in mind is telos oriented, and that
Right.
responsibility is the truth itself,
Right.
right? And so, anyway,
Yeah, no, that's all really good discussion. If
sorry,
we
you got
ever
me
do,
off on a tangent there.
oh, dude, no, it's a good tangent. I'm sure that's like more relevant to people than talking about the fact that you need a secretariat for some sort of apostolic, relations
Yeah,
organization in the Vatican.
yeah.
I was gonna say we almost had time to go through chapter 6, but now that I'm looking at it and we've been chatting, I'm like we probably don't quite have time. So, um,
Is chapter 6 the last chapter?
yeah, here, I'll bring it up and we can kind of scroll it a little bit.
Yeah.
So, chapter 6, and let me get back to the start of it now. It's only a couple like sections by number, but some of them are long. So, it's
Okay.
formation for the apostolate, and
Okay.
there's like maybe 5 or 6 paragraphs. One of them is like multiple paragraphs, very long, and
I see.
then you get to a one paragraph exhortation at the end. So,
And
that would probably
okay.
be easily doable in one more final episode on this
Yeah, and
document.
then our series will be 7 videos, which is a biblical number. So maybe
Oh,
that's
that's pretty
good.
cool. And
Yeah.
then we're gonna have to make sure that we don't ever have one end on 6 videos for a particular document, especially if it's a controversial one, because then people will have conspiracy theories. Susan says, "Spider-Man with the power of freedom comes great responsibility." That's true. I really like that distinction too, because like
Yeah.
that's a really important philosophical distinction. I remember first learning in philosophy class at a Protestant university, but they talked about the fact that like the pursuit of happiness in its original philosophical context doesn't mean the pursuit of like circumstantial glee. It means the
Hmm.
pursuit of virtue, right? Like eudaimonia, like you think about Plato and Aristotle. Like they're not talking about happiness in terms of like, oh yeah, if you eat more sugar, you get more dopamine and you're happier. They're talking about
Right.
being a fulfilled, fully formed, well-rounded, virtuous human being, right? And so, same thing with freedom and responsibility. If freedom is just pure, like libertas, like pure, unadulterated agency with no respect to your nature, that's going to become idolatrous at some point. But also, it's just destructive. And
Yes.
it's what leads to addiction, right? Like someone who doesn't have any sort of prudence in their judgments or in their decision making, and doesn't have any restraint in their consumption of like a substance or even an
Mhm.
idea or even like a personal behavior, you become unbearable and self-destructive, right? So freedom. Who is it? I heard
Yes.
someone say that like the Statue of Liberty should be counteracted by a statue on the other coast of the Statue of Responsibility.
No, I mean the climax of this way of thinking is Jean-Paul Sartre, right? Who,
Mm-hmm.
was led by this vision of freedom, this radical
Mm-hmm.
autonomy from nature and from God.
Mm-hmm.
His conclusion was that hell is the other person, and hell is where every person is in, precisely because he has to deal with the construction of his own meaning,
Hmm.
right, of his own
Mm-hmm.
nature, right.
Mm-hmm.
Existence precedes essence for Sartre. But there was something that you brought up that's important. Oh yes, you brought up eudaimonia, right, which
Mm-hmm.
is the classical understanding of freedom. It's funny because every time, what made you free in ancient Greece? It was that you were a citizen. What
Yep.
does that mean? That means a citizen is one who is able to fruitfully live in a city. A
Mm-hmm.
city requires proper order. Freedom is when you can actually take on, because citizenship came with responsibility
Mm-hmm.
towards the polis, right? So that's why
Mm-hmm.
even in the Bible, heaven is depicted as the heavenly Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
And we're
freedom.
citizens of it. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a
Mm-hmm.
freedom for the liberal is just radically autonomous and leads to the nihilism of Sartre, right? But
Right.
freedom for the classical age and for the Bible was this citizenship, this responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
this capacity to actually not care about yourself, but of the common good, which is
Right.
Catholic social teaching. That's what
Right.
we're talking about. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And not to mention, well, I am going to mention this. I don't know why I'm saying not to mention. To directly mention that this like secular, I don't even know, like, would you call it liberal? I guess it is the liberal, yeah, libertarian sort of like classic liberal freedom. It
Yeah.
it sets you up to be at war not just with traditional Catholicism, like I mean, I don't have to say traditional, with Catholicism and religion and tradition of basically every culture ever. It sets you at war not against
Mhm.
people and their ideas, but against reality itself. Because at some point, the thing oppressing you is reality itself. It's your own limited
Oh,
circumstance. It's your own I can't jump as high as that person. It's your own
yeah.
I was born in a male body and not these things, or vice versa. So like and I'm going to be honest, whenever you're at war with reality, well, one way to find out what reality is it's what you hit when you're trying to run through it, like it's an invisible wall and you come slam against it. So and I
Yeah.
think we're starting to see this, and this again, to go back to the Catholic social teaching tangent, it's like social teaching of the church is being vindicated on the ground. Like you're seeing these discussions about things like birth control and abortion and um, gender roles, even where people, like Lila Rose had a podcast that my wife was listening to about feminism and how like the research itself shows that the way that we've been raising children is like not even close to that good for them. There's all these things that now through like science and reason they're discovering, and the church is standing over here going, yeah, conventional wisdom and apostolic teaching has stood here the whole time, but liberalism said we don't need it. We'll thrust off the shackles of everything that built our civilization, and who cares what the consequences are. It will liberate us. These are shackles, they're chains, but now they're hitting reality, and I think people are starting to realize that reality itself demanded these positions, not the other way around.
Dude, that's brilliant. When you said that, I was shocked, and because you said the reality kind of hits you in the face, right? Well, David Schindler's one of his first books was called Freedom from Reality, and the
Mm.
subtitle is The Demonic Character of Modern Liberty, right? And then
Yeah.
and one of
Yes.
his other books that was later than that was called The Politics of the Real, the church between
Mm.
integralism and liberalism. And so
Oh, I
you
sound
really,
like sounds like one that needs to be in my stack.
yeah,
A book
it
that I need.
really is. It really should be. But what you were saying is exactly Schindler's point, which
Mm-hmm.
is at the end of the day, right? Liberalism is fighting reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Itself, right? It's this distortion of the real, and
Mm-hmm.
a political vision that is workable is one that takes into account the realness of the real,
Mm.
right? And that's what the
Mm-hmm.
church is trying to tell us.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the church has authority, because it points to that truth, to that good, that common good, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, excellent.
No,
I
so
love what you
good.
said. Yeah.
So good. Well, Elena says, love the tangents. You come for the document, you guys stay for the tangents. That's oh man.
Yeah.
Any other I don't really have any other thoughts on the document. Any other topics of conversation? I mean, we're still just now hitting an hour and we usually go a little longer. I'm good on time if you just want to chat about whatever, or if you want to end it and be ready for next week. I'm good for whatever you are.
Yeah, it's okay
Trying to think if I have any
if
thoughts,
the
not
videos
really.
are long or short. I mean, it is a
Yeah.
series, right? So they could be like,
Right.
"Oh, yay, let me click on the next one," right?
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah.
I think maybe let me just say this. So
Mhm.
next week we're going to end the document, and I just want to say it's a beautiful document that is almost like a good charter, a kind of good Magna Carta for the lay people, and especially their
Mhm.
apostolate, which is why you and I opened up with it. Right now, we
Mhm.
made sure to emphasize that prayer, liturgical worship, has to precede this document in our lives. We have to ground any apostolate in prior to its apostolicity. We have to ground it in liturgy, in prayer, and in Christ's work, then our work.
Mm-hmm.
But we began with that because that's our mission, you and I. That's what we're doing. We're both active in our parish. We're both active online. And has the church spoken in a manner that is like highly authoritative recently about what we're doing? Yes. And so we're reading the document. And so I'm honestly really glad that we did that together and that we opened up with that document. Maybe last thing I'd say is maybe for the next document, we don't have to choose now, but we could try to focus one that's more, I don't know, ground, maybe like Dei Verbum or Sacrosanctum Concilium. I don't know, but up to you.
Dei Verbum. Oh man, I remember as a Protestant reading that, going, okay, but what do they believe about Scripture? And just being like, the Catholic Church holds a higher view of Scripture than many Protestant churches I know, de facto on the ground. Like, it's excellent. And then that also made me encounter the reality of the weight of the Catholic sense of tradition, right? And I really love, oh gosh, I always mix up who I've been listening to because I listen to too many things, but especially expanding that in line with Benedict's view, which you can tell me if I'm on it or not, is that tradition isn't just merely the accumulation of things that are true that weren't in the Bible, but it's the whole life of the church, right? And Dei Verbum, I feel like, off memory, sort of hints at that, but it also lays the clear boundaries, like what the Catholic teaching and all that is, but then focuses on Scripture in this really beautiful way. And as like a certified like Bible nerd, that's what I was before I was Catholic. I still am. I'm not saying I'm not that now at all, but that was like, that was the first Vatican II document I read, and I was like, okay, I gotta take this stuff seriously. I gotta read the rest of this council now, because it was like, it was so good. And then I had the same experience with the Catechism. I said, okay, I read most of Vatican II, and then I said, all right, I'm going to read the Catechism of the Church, and if I disagree with anything, I'm not going to become Catholic. But if I can find myself agreeing with it, I'll become Catholic. And then ultimately I did. But that was actually years before I converted. But just the way it's written is just so beautiful. So I'd be down for that.
I would love to do Dei Verbum next if you want to. I think that's a wonderful place to go.
All right, guys. Psych, we told you to leave suggestions in the comments. Overridden. This is not
we have that authority, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Commenters, you have to participate in our apostolic YouTube mission. Just kidding.
We should get to Sacrosanctum Concilium someday, though. Mostly because that was the document that I read. Like, I read most of the major documents before coming into the church, and then I read a lot of the minor ones after already being in the church. And I read Sacrosanctum Concilium, and then just went to the mass that I've been going to. We only have one parish in our town, and the music is not at all that. And I just remember going, what gives? So I think it's an important one to read too.
I totally agree with you. Yeah, but we'll be able to cover Dei Verbum 10, which is a controversial passage. I kind of had a eureka moment last year about that passage. There was some other people debating it online, and I just had this eureka moment because I was reading precisely Ratzinger on Dei Verbum. And anyway, so that will be something really fun to talk about. But when it comes to tradition, there too, we can talk for hours on that. The two authorities for me on tradition are really Yves Congar and Joseph Ratzinger. People might get annoyed that I keep bringing Ratzinger up, but guys, you have to realize we're talking about a doctor of the church.
Yeah,
hasn't been declared yet, I know, but everyone agrees.
He's putting the bets in early, ladies and gentlemen.
Basically, okay? And he's not just this authority in theology, right? But he's an authority on the council, its interpretation, reception, and the way forward, right? And his theology is conciliar, and he also speaks to the council in light of the problems that followed the council. He really is a safe and helpful guide. And I really think actually his declaration as a doctor will provide so much stability and safety for the church. Anyway, but
I would agree. I'm reading the I wish I had it down here. It's the interview he did in like the 70s or 80s or whatever. Do you know what book I'm talking about? It's like an interview when he was
Ratzinger report.
Yeah, the Ratzinger report when he was the head of the dicastery. Well, then the whatever name it was then.
CDF,
Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith. Yeah, and it is so good. I'm tearing through it. It's so good, and I'm like, this is just an interview, bro. This is just
one of his fiery ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like in a
But
good way.
like,
In a good way. Yeah.
yeah, his statements on like what's really funny to me, and this might not surprise you, like knowing me and talking to me. What I'm finding is many of the positions and just reading the text of the church councils, like Vatican II myself, and in reflecting on the church, and just like stewing in the church's guidelines, right? Like if your conscience is well formed, you start to like extrapolate the next position on your own, just within those boundaries in that formation. In reading, oh my lights are dying. In reading that, I've realized that there are so many things that he's saying that I'm like, oh, that's what I already kind of thought, or like where I was, So that's been interesting. I'm not saying that I'm like, oh yeah, I've thought all the same stuff as Benedict every time, but many of his like
No, yeah.
longings and his just like his intellectual, but also I would say his like emotional approach, like the approach of his heart. I'm very on board with. So pretty soon there's gonna be two people
Yeah.
in this show, both going Benedict, 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 Benedict.
Yeah, I really, he's the way forward. He really is. And I think anyone who reads him, especially the scholars out there who are spending time with his theology, they know what I'm talking about. Like his being elevated to that status for the church is going to be a good for the church that we really need, I think. So
What's your
anyway.
guess on the timeline of that? How many years? Our lifetime or
Well,
no?
technically, I think there's a 5 years requirement. I think it's 5. It might be 7 for for the process of canonization. Now
Okay.
that was overturned for John Paul,
Right.
by request of the faithful that was granted by Pope Benedict at the time. So he first needs to be canonized, and so we'll see how that works out. So I think we will see it before the end of our lifetime. I think
That'd
it
be
would
dope.
actually be good if it was done quicker, sooner rather than later. But we don't know, and God's in charge. So
Yeah. No, I think it'd be good too. Like the more, because I remember reading Introduction to Christianity and going, oh, this is a heavy hitter right here. This is not just some dude
oh yeah,
who had a high position that had thoughts to share. Like this is like the real deal. I have a lot of,
oh
I
yeah,
have another book. I have The Spirit of the Liturgy. Is that one of his books? Is that what it is? The Spirit of the
yes,
Liturgy. I have that one on my
yes,
nightstand. That's after the Ratzinger report. I'm going to read that.
yes.
There's probably like a preferred order. I don't know.
If someone's watching and they want to know how to get into Ratzinger, if you're already like deep into theology, I would say begin with Introduction to Christianity.
It's really good.
And it's almost like a kind of a key to understanding the implications of everything else he writes. But if you're not really reading a lot of theology but want to start reading him, where should I start? If that's the question, I would say begin with his Jesus of Nazareth series. Or this one little booklet. This is kind of in between. It's called "Behold the Pierced One." That's a good one to start with.
He wrote so much stuff, dude. It's like a lifetime worth of reading. But it's good.
Incredible.
It's all good. All right, everybody. Well, we'll end the tangents here for now. Come back next week. We'll be on Dom's channel. Wait, Dom's channel. There we go. It's opposite of what I think. With the last chapter for the decree on the Apostolate of the Laity. If you guys have been benefiting from this content on both of our channels, please subscribe to both channels. Make sure that you're keeping up with all of our stuff. Dom, you got anything interesting coming up? I know you said you were kind of working on some stuff, but you're busy as well. So any upcoming videos or projects?
Yeah, I'm going through those seminars again to jot down questions to send to Dr. Declue. So, but that might take a while because I'm busy. But other than that, no, I'm really looking forward to continuing to make videos with you, Drew. So stay tuned, everyone.
When you do, if and when the video with Dr. Declue happens, you should live stream it so I can be in the comment section asking questions as well. Oh man,
I will let you know for sure. Yeah,
I watched his video with oh, I just forgot the guy's name.
Is it Chris Plants?
Yes, Chris Plants. Yeah.
Yes.
It was amazing. It was so good.
It was very good. Yes.
Yeah. Which I reached out to Chris too. I would love to get him on here.
Yeah.
But,
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah. Head over to Dom's channel and bother him until Dr. Declue comes on. As far as my channel goes, I'm trying to get a couple interviews set up with some people. Trying to just schedule a few things, so we'll see what comes out of that. I am going to Rome in February, so my wife and I are going to go on a 12-day pilgrimage with our diocese. Yeah, from February 12th to 24th. So, yeah, so we'll be doing that, which is it's jam-packed. It's going to be really cool. I'm going to be exhausted. eat some good pasta. We're gonna go to a papal audience, I think, too, on one of the Wednesday general audiences. So we'll see. I'll try to do some filming without getting kicked out by the Swiss Guard or something. So some of that's going to come up. But anyways, everyone, just make sure you share this with people who are interested in Vatican II stuff. Subscribe, and we will see you next time on the Dom and Drew Show.